Clara Newman stood in the dusty doorway of her uncle's trading post in Los Alamos, New Mexico, listening to the two women whisper as they passed, their voices carrying on the hot summer wind of 1872. Such a shame about the Newman girl. Blind as a bat and no prospects. No man would want a wife who cannot even see to cook or clean properly. The words stung, but Clara had heard variations of them her entire 22 years, ever since the fever had stolen her sight when she was 7 years old. She turned back into the relative coolness of the store, her fingers trailing along the familiar wooden counter. Her Uncle Herbert had taken her in after her parents died, and while he was kind enough, she knew he worried about what would become of her. At night, when he thought she was asleep in her small room above the store, she heard him discussing her future with his wife Margaret, their voices heavy with concern. "We cannot care for her forever, Herbert," Margaret would say. "We are getting old, and when we are gone, what will become of her?" Clara had no answer to that question herself. She made herself useful where she could, organizing supplies by touch and smell, sweeping the wooden floors, helping to prepare meals in the kitchen where everything had its place. But she knew the truth that everyone whispered she was a burden, and no man would choose to shoulder that burden willingly. The bell above the door chimed, and Clara recognized the heavy footsteps of Mr. Patterson, who ran the general store 2 streets over. "Afternoon, Clara," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Your uncle about?" "He went to meet the supply wagon," Clara replied. "Should be back within the hour." "I will return later then." He paused, and Clara could feel his gaze on her. "You doing all right, girl?" "I am well, thank you, Mr. Patterson." After he left, Clara made her way carefully to the back room where they kept the excess inventory. She had been working on a system to better organize the supplies, using different textures and arrangements to identify items without sight. Her fingers moved over burlap sacks of flour and beans, wooden crates of canned goods, and the rough hemp of rope coils. This was where she felt most useful, most capable. The afternoon wore on, and Clara was arranging a new shipment of dry goods when she heard raised voices outside. Her uncle had returned, but he was not alone. "I am telling you, Herbert, the girl needs a husband," Margaret was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "The widow Peterson mentioned that her cousin in Santa Fe might be willing to consider her, despite her condition." "Margaret, Clara is not livestock to be bartered away to the first man who will take her," Herbert protested. "And what is your solution? Keep her here until we are dead and gone, and then what? She will end up in some charitable home if she is lucky. Is that what you want for her?" Clara pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified her. "Let me at least write to the cousin," Margaret continued. "See if he would be amenable to a meeting." "Fine," Herbert said, defeated. "But Clara must agree to it. I will not force her into anything." That evening, her uncle approached her as she was preparing for bed. She heard his heavy tread on the stairs and the creak of the 3rd step that always announced visitors to her small room. "Clara," he began, his voice gentle, "your aunt and I need to speak with you about your future." Clara sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap. "I heard you this afternoon, Uncle. I know I'm a burden." "You are not a burden," Herbert said firmly, and she heard him pull up the small chair from her desk. "You are family, and we love you. But Margaret is right that we need to think practically about what comes next. We are not young anymore, and this country is hard on old bones." "Mrs. Peterson's cousin in Santa Fe," Clara said quietly. "What is he like?" "I do not know, truthfully. Margaret will write to him and inquire. But Clara, you do not have to agree to anything you do not want. I need you to know that." Clara nodded, but they both knew her options were limited. A blind woman in the territories had few choices: family charity or marriage to someone willing to overlook her disability. Neither promised much happiness. 3 weeks later, Margaret received a response. The cousin, a shopkeeper named Thomas Price, was willing to meet Clara with the potential for marriage if they suited each other. He was 43 years old, a widower with no children, and according to Mrs. Peterson, a respectable if somewhat dull man. "He will be passing through Los Alamos in 2 weeks on his way to Colorado on business," Margaret explained, reading from the letter. "He has agreed to stop and make your acquaintance." Clara felt as though she were standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to see what lay below, but knowing she would soon have to jump. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of anxious preparation. Margaret fussed over Clara's clothing, insisting on making her a new dress for the meeting. Clara submitted to the fittings, standing still as her aunt pinned and stitched, creating a dress of soft blue cotton that Margaret assured her brought out her eyes. "Though it is a shame they do not see," Margaret added, not unkindly, but thoughtlessly. "You have your mother's eyes, you know, beautiful blue like the sky before a storm." The day of Thomas Price's arrival dawned hot and clear. Clara woke with her stomach in knots, and she could barely eat the breakfast Margaret prepared. She dressed carefully in her new gown, and Margaret arranged her long dark hair, which Clara knew fell to her waist when loose, but was now pinned up in what her aunt described as a fashionable style. "You look lovely, dear," Margaret said, and Clara heard genuine affection in her voice. "Just remember to smile and nod and let him do most of the talking. Men like that." Clara waited in the front room of the trading post, perched on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. When the door finally opened and her uncle ushered Mr. Price inside, Clara stood automatically. "Miss Newman," a nasal voice said, "a pleasure to make your acquaintance." "Mr. Price," Clara replied, grateful her voice remained steady. "Welcome to Los Alamos." What followed was perhaps the most awkward hour of Clara's life. Thomas Price spoke at length about his shop in Santa Fe, his comfortable home, his standing in the community. He asked Clara a few perfunctory questions about her abilities and whether she could manage a household. "I would require a wife who could maintain my home in proper order," he said. "I'm accustomed to a certain standard of living. Your aunt assures me you are capable, despite your condition." Clara felt each word like a small cut. He spoke to her as though she were a potential servant, rather than a woman he might marry. When he finally took his leave, promising to write with his decision after he considered the matter, Clara felt more hopeless than ever. "He seemed quite taken with you," Margaret said after he left, but her tone lacked conviction. Herbert said nothing, but Clara heard him sigh heavily. A week later, Thomas Price's letter arrived. He had decided, after much consideration, that while Miss Newman seemed a decent sort, he required a wife who could see to entertain guests and represent him properly in society. He wished her well in finding a suitable situation. "The nerve of that man," Margaret fumed, "as though he were some prize himself, all those airs." But Clara heard the relief in her uncle's voice when he said, "Perhaps it is for the best. He did not seem the right sort for our Clara." Clara excused herself and made her way upstairs, where she sat on her bed and let the tears come. Not because she had wanted to marry Thomas Price, she had not, but because his rejection confirmed what everyone already knew. She was unmarriageable, a burden no man would willingly take on. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of shouting in the street. She made her way downstairs carefully, where she found her uncle at the window. "What is happening?" she asked. "Trouble up in the mountains," Herbert replied. "Miners found dead, looked like bear attacks. They are organizing a hunting party." Over the next few days, the town buzzed with talk of the bear. 3 more men had been found mauled, and fear gripped Los Alamos. The hunting parties returned empty-handed, unable to track the creature in the dense mountain forests. "They are saying it is a grizzly," Mr. Patterson told Clara when he stopped by the trading post. "Biggest anyone has seen in these parts. Got claws that could rip a man clean in half." Clara shuddered at the description. The mountains surrounded Los Alamos on 3 sides, and the thought of such a creature so close made the whole town uneasy. It was on the 5th day after the attacks began that he arrived. Clara was in the trading post when the door opened. She heard the footsteps, first heavy, measured, the tread of a large man who moved with purpose. But it was the silence that followed his entrance that made her pause. The usual bustle of the store simply stopped. "Can I help you?" Herbert asked, and Clara heard the uncertainty in his uncle's voice. "Heard you got bear trouble." The voice was deep, rough as gravel, but there was an odd gentleness to it that did not match its timbre. "Name is Samuel Morrison. I've tracked grizzlies before." "You are a hunter?" Herbert asked. "Among other things. I live up in the high country north of here. Word reached me about your problem." Clara moved closer, drawn by curiosity. She could smell wood smoke and pine, leather and something wild that she could not name. She could hear his breathing, slow and steady, and she imagined he must be very large to make those heavy footfalls. "We have had hunting parties out for days," Herbert said. "They have found nothing. Your hunting parties are making too much noise. Bear knows they are coming, stays clear. I work alone. I can track it." There was a commotion as several of the town's men who had been browsing the store gathered around. "Who are you exactly?" demanded Bill Hutchins, one of the local ranchers. "You come in here making big claims, but we do not know you from Adam. I told you my name, Morrison. I track, I hunt, and I have killed more bears than you have seen in your lifetime. You want my help or not?" Clara heard the rustle of movement and sensed the tension in the room rising. She could imagine the men sizing up this stranger, trying to decide if he was legitimate or just another drifter looking to take advantage. "Let me see your hands," Herbert said suddenly. There was a pause, and then Clara heard the creak of leather as the stranger presumably removed his gloves. The sharp intake of breath from several men told her that what they saw was significant. "Mountain lion?" Herbert asked quietly. "Among other things. As I said, I have experience with dangerous animals." "The town can pay if you succeed," Herbert said. $500 to kill the bear." "Keep your money. Just want supplies for the hunt. Ammunition, some rope, salt pork, and coffee." Clara felt eyes turning toward her uncle, who served as one of the unofficial leaders of Los Alamos. After a long moment, Herbert said, "Deal. Clara, can you help Mr. Morrison gather what he needs?" Clara startled. She had not expected to be drawn into this conversation. "Of course, uncle." As the other men dispersed, still muttering among themselves, Clara heard the stranger approach. She realized she'd been right. He was tall, very tall. Even standing several feet away, she had to tilt her head up toward where she sensed his presence. "Miss," he said, his voice softer now that the others had moved away. "I do not mean to be trouble, but I'm not sure you heard. I need supplies." "I heard," Clara replied, "and I can help you. I may be blind, Mr. Morrison, but I know this store better than anyone." There was a long silence, and Clara wondered what he was thinking. She was accustomed to people's shocked reactions when they realized she could not see, but something about his silence felt different, contemplative rather than pitying. Fair enough," he said finally. "Lead the way." Clara moved through the store with practiced ease, her fingers trailing along shelves and counters as reference points. "Ammunition first. What caliber?" "45-70. She nodded and made her way to the cabinet where they kept ammunition, counting shelves and reaching for the correct box without hesitation. She held it out, and after a moment felt him take it from her hand. His fingers brushed hers briefly, rough, calloused, with raised lines that must have been scars. "How many boxes?" she asked. "3 should do." They continued through the store, Clara gathering items with quiet efficiency. Salt pork from the barrels in the back, coffee beans that she measured out by weight and feel, rope from the coils hanging on the wall. She was aware of him watching her, but unlike most people, he did not try to help or take over. He simply followed and accepted what she handed him. "You know your way around," he observed as she measured out the last of the coffee beans. "I have had time to learn," Clara replied. "This has been my home for 15 years. "Your uncle mentioned you were Clara. You are Herbert's daughter?" "Niece. He and his wife took me in after my parents died, after I lost my sight." "What happened?" Most people did not ask directly. They whispered behind her back or carefully avoided the topic. His straightforwardness was refreshing. "Fever when I was 7. It took my sight but spared my life. Many in town were not so fortunate that year." "That is rough, but you have adapted well." Clara felt a small flush of pride at the compliment. "I do what I can. Is there anything else you need, Mr. Morrison?" "Call me Samuel. And no, I think that covers it." She tallied the items in her head, calculating the cost. "That will be $12.30. She heard the clink of coins as he counted them out and placed them on the counter. She swept them up automatically, her fingers quickly confirming the amount. "You are not afraid?" he asked suddenly. "Of what?" "That I cannot kill the bear, that I might be taking supplies under false pretenses." Clara tilted her head, considering. "Are you?" "No." "Then I am not afraid. You sound like a man who knows his business." Another long pause. Then, unexpectedly, "Would you walk with me?" Clara blinked, surprised. "Walk with you?" "Outside. I find town stifling, too many people, too much noise. But I need to scout the area, figure out where this bear's holing up. Thought you might like some air." "I do not think I would be much help scouting for bear tracks, Mr. Morrison." "Samuel. And I'm not asking for help. Just company, if you are willing." Clara could not remember the last time someone had asked for her company simply for its own sake. The invitation, unexpected and oddly formal, touched something in her chest. "Let me tell my uncle," she said. Herbert was less than enthusiastic about Clara going anywhere with this stranger, but Margaret, surprisingly, encouraged it. "Let her go, Herbert. The man seems decent enough, and Clara should have a chance to get out. She spends too much time cooped up in here." So Clara found herself stepping out into the hot afternoon sun, her hand resting lightly on Samuel Morrison's offered arm. His arm was solid as oak beneath her fingers, corded with muscle that spoke of hard physical labor. He moved slowly, adjusting his pace to hers, and did not pull or guide her impatiently. "Where are we going?" Clara asked as they walked. "Edge of town, where the forest starts. That is where the bear will be coming from." They walked in silence for a while, Clara focusing on the changing terrain beneath her feet, wooden boardwalk giving way to packed dirt, then sparse grass. The sounds of the town faded behind them, replaced by the rustle of wind through trees and the distant call of birds. "It is quiet out here," Clara observed. "Peaceful. That is why I prefer the mountains. Too many people makes me uneasy." "Why?" "People stare, people judge. In the mountains there is none of that, just you and the land." Clara thought she understood something in his words. "People stare at me too," she said quietly. "Or they look away quickly, embarrassed. Sometimes I'm not sure which is worse." "Looking away," Samuel said immediately. "At least staring is honest." Clara found herself smiling. "I suppose that is true." They reached what Samuel described as the forest edge, and he helped her sit on what felt like a fallen log. The bark was rough beneath her hands, and she could smell the rich scent of pine and earth. "Tell me what you see," she said impulsively. "Why?" "Because I would like to know." "Please." She heard him shift, settling beside her on the log. When he spoke, his voice had a thoughtful quality. "Mountains to the north and west, covered in pine and aspen. Sky is clear, deep blue, with a few clouds building over the peaks. Might get rain tonight. Below us, the town is spread out like toys, all those wooden buildings looking small from here, and beyond the town, the land opens up, rolling hills and mesas stretching south toward the desert country." "It sounds beautiful." "It is. You can feel it, though, even without seeing. The way the wind changes as it comes down from the peaks, the smell of the pines, the sound of the creek running somewhere below us." Clara closed her eyes, which made no difference to what she saw, but somehow helped her focus on the other senses. He was right. She could feel the grandeur of the landscape in the cool wind that carried the scent of snow from distant peaks, could hear the vastness in the way sounds traveled. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For describing it. Most people just say something is pretty and leave it at that. They forget that I want to know the details." "I am not most people." Clara turned toward him, wishing she could see his face. "No, I do not think you are. The men in the store, they were frightened of you." "Why?" A long silence stretched between them. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "I am not what you would call pleasant to look at. Got scars, lots of them, face, hands, everywhere. From fights with animals mostly, but some from fights with men. I am big and rough, and I move through the world in a way that makes people nervous. They see me and think monster." "And are you?" Clara asked. "A monster?" "No. But I'm not a gentleman either. I'm just a man who knows the mountains and prefers the company of trees to people." Clara reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away until her fingers found his arm. Even through his shirt, she could feel the ridges of scar tissue, the thick muscle beneath. "I cannot see your scars, Samuel Morrison, but I can tell you are strong and that you have lived through things that would have killed weaker men. That does not make you a monster. It makes you a survivor." His arm tensed under her hand, and for a moment she thought she had overstepped. Then she felt him relax, heard him exhale slowly. "You are different from most people too, Clara Newman." "Because I am blind?" "Because you see more than most people who have working eyes." They sat together as the afternoon wore on, and Samuel told her about his life in the mountains. He had been born in Missouri but came west as a young man seeking something he could not name. He had found it in the high country, in the silent peaks and deep forests where a man could go days without seeing another human soul. He trapped furs in winter, hunted in summer, and mostly kept to himself. "Do you never get lonely?" Clara asked. "Sometimes. But loneliness in the mountains is different from loneliness in a crowd. At least in the mountains, I know why I'm alone." Clara understood that too. She was surrounded by people every day in Los Alamos, but she was profoundly lonely in a way that had nothing to do with company. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when Samuel finally said, "I should get you back before your uncle sends a search party." He helped her to her feet and they walked back to town slowly. At the door to the trading post, he paused. "I will be heading into the mountains at first light to track the bear. If I find it, I should be back in a few days. If I do not come back at all, well, you will know the bear got me." "That's not funny," Clara said sharply. "It was not meant to be. Just truth." "Then do not let the bear get you." "I would like to talk with you again, Samuel Morrison." She felt more than saw his surprise. "You would?" "Yes." "Very much?" "Then I will do my best to stay alive, Clara Newman." She listened to his footsteps fade into the evening, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Samuel left before dawn the next morning, and the town settled into nervous waiting. Clara went about her usual tasks, but her mind kept returning to her conversation with the mountain man. There had been something in the way he spoke to her, the way he described the world without pity or condescension, that had awakened something in her she thought had died with her sight, the sense that she was a whole person, not just a burden to be managed. 3 days passed with no word. On the 4th day, Clara was sweeping the front steps of the trading post when she heard running footsteps and excited voices. "He got it!" someone shouted. "The mountain man killed the bear!" Clara's heart leaped, and she gripped her broom handle tightly. "Is he all right?" she called out to whoever was running past. "He is alive!" came the breathless reply. "Bringing the carcass down now!" Clara wanted to run toward the commotion she could hear building at the edge of town, but she forced herself to remain calm. She went inside and told her uncle the news. "Well, I will be," Herbert said. "I had my doubts, but it seems the man knew what he was talking about." An hour later, Samuel Morrison walked into the trading post. Clara smelled him before she heard him: blood and sweat, pine and gunpowder. She heard her uncle go to greet him. "You did it," Herbert said, genuine admiration in his voice. "That is the biggest bear I have ever seen. Must be 9 feet tall." 9.5, Samuel replied. "It was an old male, probably injured at some point, which made it desperate and dangerous. Found where it had been denning in a cave about 10 miles north of here. Tracked it for 2 days before I could get a clean shot. The town owes you a debt. That reward, I told you I do not want money, just needed to resupply. At least let us throw you a celebration dinner. The hotel is putting together something tonight." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "I am not much for celebrations or crowds." "Please come," Clara heard herself say, stepping forward. "You saved lives. Let people thank you properly." Another pause and then, "All right, but only for a little while." That evening, the hotel dining room was packed with townspeople wanting to see the man who had killed the bear. Clara attended with her aunt and uncle, wearing her blue dress again at Margaret's insistence. The room was loud with conversation and the clatter of dishes, and Clara found it overwhelming after the quiet conversation she had shared with Samuel at the forest edge. She was seated between her aunt and uncle when she heard the room fall suddenly silent. Heavy footsteps approached, and then Samuel's voice said, "Is there room?" "Of course," Herbert said quickly. "Please, sit." There was the scrape of a chair, and Clara sensed Samuel settling beside her. The conversation in the room slowly resumed, but Clara could hear the whispers, could feel the stares directed at their table. I see what you mean about people staring," she murmured to Samuel. "They will tire of it eventually," he replied, his voice pitched low for her ears only. "Small towns, big news. Give them a week and they will forget all about me." The meal was served, and Clara focused on eating carefully, always conscious in public settings of the need to maintain dignity despite not being able to see her plate. Beside her, Samuel ate steadily and said little, answering questions from other townspeople with short, clipped responses. Halfway through the meal, Mayor Hutchins stood and made a speech thanking Samuel for his service to Los Alamos. Samuel endured it stoically, and when the mayor tried to present him with the reward money anyway, Samuel stood abruptly. "Keep your money," he said flatly. "Use it for something the town needs. I did not come here for payment." The mayor spluttered, clearly unused to having his generosity refused, but Samuel was already moving toward the door. Clara heard his footsteps and made a quick decision. "Excuse me," she said to her aunt and uncle, rising from her seat. She made her way carefully toward where she had heard the door open and close, reaching it just as someone helpfully opened it for her. Outside, the night air was cool and welcome after the stuffy dining room. Clara heard footsteps ahead of her on the boardwalk and called out, "Samuel, wait!" The footsteps stopped. "You should go back inside, Clara. Enjoy the celebration." "I did not come out here for the celebration. I came out here because I wanted to talk to you." She heard him approach, his footsteps measured and careful. "About what?" "About why you really helped us. You said you did not want money, but you must have had a reason to track that bear." A long silence stretched between them. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been vulnerability. "I heard about the blind girl in town, the one everyone said no man would ever want. And I thought about how people say the same thing about me in different words, that I am too scarred, too rough, too much of everything that decent folk do not want. And I thought maybe we were not so different, you and I." Clara's breath caught. "You came here because of me?" "Partly, and partly because I do not like the thought of innocent people dying when I might be able to help. But yes, I wanted to meet you. Wanted to see if the blind girl was as pathetic as they said, or if she was something more." "And what did you find?" "That you are stronger than most people I have met. That you have adapted to something that would have broken others. That you are kind and smart and deserve better than what this town thinks you deserve." Clara felt tears prick her useless eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such straightforward honesty and regard. "Samuel, You should know what you are dealing with before you say anything else," Samuel interrupted. "I told you I am scarred, but I did not tell you the full truth. My face, Clara, it is bad. Mountain lion got me when I was younger, tore up the whole left side. My mouth does not work quite right anymore, and I have got marks all down my neck and chest from other fights. Children cry when they see me. Women turn away. I am not someone you want to be associated with." "And you should know something about me," Clara said, stepping closer until she was near enough to feel the warmth of him. "I do not see what people look like. I see what they are. And what you are, Samuel Morrison, is a good man, a strong man, a man who came to help a town that was not his own and who speaks to me like I am a person worth knowing. That is what matters to me." She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away until her fingers found his face. She felt him flinch but hold still as her fingertips traced the terrain of his features. The left side was indeed heavily scarred, the tissue raised and twisted, pulling his mouth slightly to one side. But beneath the scars, she felt the shape of his strong jaw, high cheekbones, a broad forehead. Her fingers moved to his hair, which fell past his shoulders, thick and slightly tangled. "You have long hair," she observed. "Easier than cutting it regularly," he said, and she could hear the tension in his voice. "Clara, you do not have to. I am not doing this because I have to," she said firmly. "I am doing this because I want to know what you look like, and now I do. You are strong and solid, and the scars are part of you, but they are not all of you." His hand came up and gently circled her wrist, stopping her exploration. "People would talk if they saw us together, would make things difficult for you." "People already talk about me. At least this would give them something more interesting to discuss." "Clara, I am not a man who knows how to live in towns with neighbors and social calls and all that goes with it. I am rough and I am plain-spoken, and I do not have much to offer a woman." "What are you saying, Samuel?" "I am saying that I came to Los Alamos thinking I would kill a bear and meet the blind girl and then go back to my mountains. But now that I have met you, I find I do not want to leave. Not without knowing if there might be something here worth staying for." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I do not want you to leave either," she whispered. His hand tightened on her wrist, and then she felt his other hand come up to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Then I will stay a while longer, if you will let me court you properly. I would like that very much." They stood together in the darkness, and Clara felt the world shifting beneath her feet. For so long, she had accepted that her life would be one of quiet resignation, of being grateful for whatever small kindnesses came her way. But Samuel Morrison had appeared like a force of nature, and he was offering her something she had never expected to have a chance at happiness, at love, at a life beyond mere survival. Over the next several weeks, Samuel became a fixture in Los Alamos. He took a room at the boarding house and found work helping some of the local ranchers with predator problems, but most of his time was spent with Clara. They fell into a pattern of taking daily walks, with Samuel describing the world around them in the detailed way that Clara loved. He had a gift for it, painting pictures with words that made Clara feel as though she could almost see. He was also unfailingly patient with her independence. When they walked, he offered his arm but did not pull or guide her beyond what she needed. When they sat together, he described things when she asked but did not overwhelm her with unnecessary detail. He seemed to understand instinctively how to support her without making her feel helpless. "How did you know to do this?" Clara asked him one afternoon as they sat by the creek that ran east of town. "To help without taking over?" "My mother was ill for many years before she died," Samuel replied. "Could not walk without help, could not do much for herself. I watched people treat her like she was made of glass or like she was stupid, because her body did not work right, but she was sharp as a tack until the very end. I learned then that needing help is not the same as being helpless. I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago, but I carry what she taught me." Clara reached for his hand and found it waiting for hers. His hands fascinated her, so large and rough, scarred from countless encounters with sharp things and dangerous animals, but capable of such gentleness. He held her hand carefully, as though afraid of hurting her. "Tell me about your scars," she said impulsively. "Which ones?" "All of them. I want to know the stories." So Samuel told her. The mountain lion that had mauled his face when he was 18, teaching him to never turn his back on a cornered animal. The bear that had clawed his chest when he was 25, nearly killing him before he managed to drive his knife into its heart. The wolf that had bitten deep into his forearm, leaving teeth marks that would never fully fade. A dozen smaller scars from knife fights, falls, and the general violence of frontier life. "You have lived a dangerous life," Clara observed. "It is the life I chose. The mountains are beautiful, but they are not gentle. They do not forgive mistakes." "Do you ever regret it?" "No, but I'm starting to think that maybe I have had enough of living alone in the high country. Maybe it is time for something different." Clara's breath caught. "Samuel, I am not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet. We have not known each other long enough for that, but I want you to know what I'm thinking, where my mind is going." "And where is it going?" "Toward a future where I do not go back to the mountains alone, where I have a reason to come down from the high country more often, where I have someone waiting who actually wants me to come back." Clara turned toward him, wishing she could see his expression. "I would want you to come back, Samuel. I already dread the thought of you leaving." His thumb stroked over her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her ache. "Then I will stay as long as you will have me." As summer deepened into early fall, Clara found herself happier than she had ever been. Samuel was unlike anyone she had ever known, straightforward to the point of bluntness, but with a core of kindness that revealed itself in unexpected ways. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, describing their colors and shapes. He helped her uncle with heavy work around the trading post, never asking for payment. He sat with her in the evenings while she knitted, content with companionable silence, and he was unfailingly protective. When Bill Hutchins made a disparaging comment about Clara being unable to run a proper household, Samuel had fixed him with a stare that made the rancher backtrack immediately. When a group of rough cowboys came through town and one of them got too forward with Clara outside the general store, Samuel appeared seemingly from nowhere and suggested in a tone that brooked no argument that they move along. "You do not have to fight my battles for me," Clara told him later, though she was secretly pleased. "I am not fighting your battles. I am making it clear that you have someone who stands with you. There is a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Fighting your battles would mean you could not handle them yourself. Standing with you means you could handle them, but you do not have to do it alone." Clara smiled. "That's a fine distinction, Samuel Morrison. It is an important one." It was in late September that Herbert finally broached the subject that had been hovering unspoken over all their interactions. Samuel," he said one evening when the three of them were sitting in the back room of the trading post. "You have been spending considerable time with my niece." "I have," Samuel agreed, "with your permission." "Which I gave. But I think it is time we spoke plainly about your intentions." "Uncle," Clara protested, embarrassed. "No, Clara, he's right," Samuel said. "I've been courting you for nearly 3 months now. It is past time we spoke openly about where this is heading." He turned to Herbert. "My intentions are to marry your niece if she will have me. I know I am not what anyone would have chosen for her. I do not have much in the way of money or property. I have a small cabin in the mountains and enough saved to get by. But I can provide for her, and I will protect her with my life. And I will never treat her as less than what she is, a strong, capable woman who deserves respect and love." Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks. This was the first time Samuel had spoken of love, and hearing it made her heart soar. Herbert was quiet for a long moment. "Clara, what do you want?" "I want to marry Samuel," Clara said without hesitation, "if he is truly asking." "I am asking," Samuel confirmed. He moved closer to Clara, and she felt him take her hands. "Clara Newman, will you marry me? Will you take me, scars and rough edges and all, and build a life with me?" "Yes," Clara breathed. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." She felt him pull her into his arms, and she went willingly, burying her face against his chest. He was solid and warm and real, and he was choosing her, not settling for her, not taking her as a charitable act, but choosing her because he wanted her. "Well then," Herbert said, and Clara could hear the emotion in his voice, "I suppose we should start planning a wedding." Margaret was delighted when she heard the news, immediately launching into elaborate plans for the ceremony. But Samuel gently but firmly put his foot down. "Something small," he said. "Clara and I are not people who need a big fuss, just family and a few friends, if that is all right." Clara was grateful for his intervention. The thought of a large ceremony with dozens of people watching and whispering was overwhelming. A small gathering sounded perfect. They were married on a cool October morning in the small church at the edge of Los Alamos. Clara wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen that Margaret had sewn, and she carried a bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Samuel had picked himself. Samuel wore a new shirt and pants, and according to Margaret, he had even trimmed his hair and beard, though he had drawn the line at cutting them short. Clara was nervous as her uncle walked her down the aisle, but when she reached Samuel's side and felt his hand take hers, all the nervousness faded. His hand was steady and sure, and when the minister asked him to speak his vows, his voice rang out clear and strong. "I, Samuel Morrison, take you, Clara Newman, to be my wife. I promise to stand with you, not over you, to support you, not confine you, to love you for who you are, not who others think you should be. I give you my loyalty, my protection, and my heart for as long as we both shall live." Clara's voice shook as she spoke her own vows, promising to honor him, to build a life with him, to love him in all his roughness and tenderness. When the minister finally pronounced them married, Samuel lifted her veil with careful hands and kissed her gently, as though afraid he might hurt her. The celebration afterward was small but warm, held in the back room of the trading post. Herbert gave a toast that had Clara wiping away tears, and even Margaret admitted that perhaps Samuel was exactly the right man for Clara after all. "You're good for each other," Margaret told Clara privately. "I see the way he looks at you, like you are the most precious thing in his world. And I see the way you smile now, truly smile, not that polite smile you used to wear. You have found something real, Clara. Hold on to it." As evening fell, Samuel and Clara made their way to the small house at the edge of town that Samuel had rented for them. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but Samuel had spent the past week making sure everything was arranged so Clara could navigate it easily. "I know it is not much," Samuel said as he lifted her over the threshold, "but it is ours." Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar landscape of scars. "It is perfect because you are here." That night, Samuel was patient and gentle with Clara, guiding her through the intimacy of marriage with the same care he showed in everything else. He described what he was doing, asked what she liked, moved slowly to give her time to adjust, and when they finally came together fully, Clara felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Samuel stroked her hair and said, "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a life beyond survival. Thank you for choosing me, Clara." "Thank you for seeing me," Clara replied, "for seeing past what I cannot do to who I am." "You are extraordinary," Samuel said simply. Anyone who could not see that was blind in ways that have nothing to do with eyes. Life as Samuel's wife was different from anything Clara had imagined. Samuel had work in town for a few more weeks, but he was clear from the beginning that eventually they would need to move to his cabin in the mountains. "I am not a town man," he explained to Clara as they discussed their future. "I have tried to be for these past months, but it weighs on me. The noise, the people, the expectations. I need the mountains, Clara, but I will not take you there if you cannot bear it. We will find a compromise." "Tell me about the cabin," Clara said. "Describe it to me." So Samuel described his home in the high country, a sturdy log structure he had built himself, tucked into a valley surrounded by pine forests. There was a creek nearby for water, good hunting and trapping, and the nearest neighbor was a 2-hour ride away. In winter, they might be snowed in for weeks at a time. "It is isolated," Samuel said honestly, "and the winters are hard. You would need to rely on me for many things you could do yourself in town. But you would be happy there," Clara said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Then we will make it work. I adapted to living in town after I lost my sight. I can adapt to living in the mountains. It will not be easy." "Nothing worth having is easy, Samuel. You taught me that." They spent the next month preparing for the move. Herbert was sad to see Clara go, but understood that her place was with her husband. Margaret fussed and worried, but helped Clara prepare, teaching her to preserve foods and make medicines that would be essential in the isolated cabin. Samuel was meticulous in his preparations, making lists of supplies they would need and explaining to Clara exactly what to expect. He was determined that she would not go into this blindly, quite literally, and that she would have every tool she needed to succeed. In late November, they loaded a wagon with their supplies and said goodbye to Los Alamos. The journey to Samuel's cabin took 3 days, following mountain trails that grew progressively narrower and steeper. Samuel described everything they passed, the way the pine trees grew thicker, the glimpses of snow-capped peaks, the deer and elk they spotted grazing in meadows. When they finally arrived at the cabin, Samuel helped Clara down from the wagon and guided her inside. The space was small, just one main room with a sleeping loft and a small addition for storage. But Samuel had built it well, with tight walls and a solid roof that would keep out the mountain weather. "It smells like pine and wood smoke," Clara observed, breathing deeply. "That is the logs in the fireplace. I built everything from trees I cut myself." Over the next several weeks, Samuel patiently taught Clara the layout of the cabin and the surrounding area. He showed her the path to the creek, counting steps and marking it with rope railings. He taught her where he stored tools and supplies, creating a system that would allow her to find what she needed. He built raised beds near the cabin so she could tend a garden come spring, and he showed her the root cellar where they would store preserved foods. It was hard work, and there were frustrating moments when Clara felt overwhelmed by the isolation and the challenges of navigating a completely new environment. But Samuel was patient, never making her feel inadequate or foolish. "You're learning a new world," he would say when she grew frustrated. "It takes time." As winter closed in around them, Clara found a rhythm to life in the mountains. Her days were filled with domestic tasks, cooking, cleaning, tending the fire, working on sewing and knitting projects. Samuel was often out checking his trap lines or hunting, but he always returned before dark, stomping snow from his boots and bringing the cold smell of winter into the warm cabin. The evenings were Clara's favorite time. After dinner, they would sit by the fire, and Samuel would work on various projects while Clara knitted or mended clothes. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their future. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, content simply to be together. Samuel told her stories of the mountains, describing animals she had never seen and landscapes that took her breath away just in imagination. He taught her to recognize different bird calls and the sounds that animals made moving through the forest. He described the way moonlight looked on fresh snow and how the stars seemed close enough to touch in the clear mountain air. And at night, they came together in the small bed in the loft, learning each other's bodies and hearts with growing intimacy. Samuel was always careful with his strength, always attentive to Clara's needs and responses. He made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced. "Do you miss town?" Samuel asked her one night as they lay tangled together beneath heavy quilts. "Sometimes I miss my aunt and uncle," Clara admitted, "and the convenience of having a store nearby. But no, I do not miss the town itself. I am happier here with you than I have ever been anywhere. Even though it is harder? Even though you need me for more things? Needing you is not a burden, Samuel. It is a privilege, and you need me too, in different ways." "I do," he agreed. "You make this cabin a home. You make me remember what it is to live, not just survive." Winter deepened, and they were indeed snowed in for weeks at a time, with drifts piling high around the cabin. But Clara did not feel trapped. Instead, she felt safe, cocooned in their small warm space while the world outside raged with cold. Samuel kept the firewood stocked and the cabin warm, and Clara kept them fed and the space comfortable. It was during one of these snowbound weeks that Clara realized she might be pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses and felt a strange fluttering in her stomach that was both exciting and terrifying. "Samuel," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, "I think I might be with child." Samuel's hands stilled on the piece of leather he had been working with. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but I'm fairly sure." She heard him move, and then he was beside her, taking her hands. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," Clara admitted. "I do not know how to be a mother, and out here, so far from help." "We will manage," Samuel said firmly. "When it is closer to your time, we will go down to Los Alamos or to Santa Fe, somewhere with a doctor. I will not let anything happen to you, Clara." "And if something does?" "Samuel, women die in childbirth, blind women trying to care for infants. You are not just any blind woman. You are Clara Morrison, who adapted to losing her sight and then adapted again to mountain life. You are strong enough for this." His certainty was comforting, even if Clara did not quite share it. Over the next months, as winter gave way to spring and her body changed with the growing child, Samuel was unfailingly supportive. He took over more of the physical tasks without making her feel useless, and he encouraged her to continue doing what she could for as long as she could. In late April, they made the journey down to Santa Fe, where Samuel had arranged for Clara to stay with a midwife for the final weeks of her pregnancy. The midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. Chen, took Clara under her wing and assured her that blindness would not prevent her from being a good mother. "You have other senses," Mrs. Chen said. "You will learn your baby's cries, will feel their needs in ways that sighted mothers miss because they rely too much on their eyes." Samuel stayed in Santa Fe, finding work to pay for their lodging and refusing to leave Clara's side for more than a few hours at a time. When Clara's labor began on a warm May evening, he was there, holding her hand and talking her through the pain with the same steady calm he brought to everything. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara was sure she would not survive it, but Samuel's voice was her anchor, and Mrs. Chen's capable hands guided her through. When she finally heard the sharp cry of a newborn, Clara sobbed with relief and exhaustion. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, "strong and healthy." Samuel's voice was thick with emotion when he said, "He is perfect, Clara. He is absolutely perfect." They named him Jacob, after Clara's father. Samuel described him in meticulous detail: dark hair like Clara's, blue eyes that might change color, a surprisingly loud cry for such a small creature. Clara held her son and marveled at the weight of him, the warmth, the way he fit perfectly in her arms. "I cannot see him," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I will never see him grow up." "But you will know him better than anyone," Samuel said. "You will know the sound of his laugh, the feel of his hand in yours, the way he moves through the world. You will know his heart, Clara. That matters more than seeing his face." They stayed in Santa Fe for 2 more weeks, giving Clara time to recover and learn the basics of caring for an infant. Samuel was an unexpected natural with the baby, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he changed diapers and soothed Jacob when he cried. Watching him, or rather, hearing him talk softly to their son, made Clara fall even more deeply in love with her husband. When they finally returned to the cabin, Clara was nervous about managing an infant in the isolated mountains. But Samuel had prepared everything, building a cradle near their bed and arranging supplies so Clara could find them easily. And Mrs. Chen had been right. Clara quickly learned to interpret Jacob's different cries, to understand his needs through sound and touch. The summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, but Clara had never been happier. Jacob thrived in the mountain air, growing strong and healthy. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, often wearing the baby in a sling across his chest while he worked around the cabin, talking to him about everything he saw. "You are teaching him the mountains," Clara observed one afternoon, as Samuel described the deer they were watching from the cabin door. "He is a mountain child," Samuel replied. "He should know this world." As Jacob grew, Clara adapted to motherhood in ways that surprised even her. She could tell where he was in the cabin by the sound of his crawling or later his toddling steps. She knew his moods by the tone of his babbling. She taught him to come to the sound of her voice and made games of helping him learn to be her eyes. "Mama, bird!" Jacob would announce, and Clara would ask him to describe what color it was, what it was doing, building his vocabulary while giving her a picture of the world. Samuel watched this with quiet pride. "You are an amazing mother," he told Clara one evening after Jacob was asleep. "I am just doing what needs to be done." "No, you are doing more than that. You are teaching him that different is not less, that there are many ways to experience the world. Those are lessons that will serve him his whole life." When Jacob was 2 years old, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time she was less fearful, confident in her ability to handle whatever came. Their daughter was born in the cabin with Samuel serving as midwife, having learned enough from Mrs. Chen and other women to manage the birth safely. They named her Sarah, after Samuel's mother. Life settled into a busy but contented routine. Samuel hunted and trapped and tended the property, while Clara managed the household and cared for the children. Jacob grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who was his father's shadow, learning to track and hunt and move through the mountains. Sarah was more like her mother, curious about everything and endlessly creative in her play. The children never thought it strange that their mother could not see. To them, it was simply how Mama was, and they adapted naturally to helping her when needed, while understanding that she was perfectly capable in most ways. When Jacob was 6 and Sarah was 4, they made one of their periodic trips to Los Alamos. Clara's aunt and uncle were aging, but still keeping the trading post running, and they loved seeing their great-niece and great-nephew. The town had grown since Clara left, and she could hear the difference in the increased noise and activity. "Things have changed," Herbert told them over dinner. "The railroad is coming through. Probably within the next 2 years, Los Alamos will be on the map." "Good for business," Samuel observed. "It will be, but I'm thinking of selling soon, retiring while we still have our health." Clara felt a pang of sadness at the thought of her uncle leaving the place that had been her home for so long. But she understood. Herbert and Margaret had earned their rest. It was on that trip that Clara overheard a conversation that reminded her how far she had come. 2 women were talking outside the general store, not realizing she was near enough to hear. "Is that the blind Newman girl? I heard she married some mountain man and went to live in the wilderness. I remember when everyone said no man would want her. But look at her now, 2 healthy children and a husband who clearly dotes on her. Just goes to show, I suppose. You never can tell how things will work out," Clara smiled to herself. She had not needed those women's approval then, and she certainly did not need it now. But there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the life people had pitied her. For blind, unmarried, a burden had transformed into something rich and full and deeply satisfying. That evening, as they prepared to leave town and return to the mountains, Clara stood with Samuel outside the trading post where they had first met. The children were inside saying goodbye to their great-aunt and great-uncle. "Do you remember the first time we spoke?" Clara asked. "I remember everything about that day," Samuel replied. "I remember thinking you were the most self-possessed blind person I had ever met. And then I spent time with you and realized you were just the most self-possessed person I had ever met, blind or otherwise. I remember being surprised that you did not treat me like a child or an invalid, that you just spoke to me like I was a person. You are a person, a remarkable one. Clara leaned against him, and his arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm. "I was so lonely before you came, Samuel. I did not even realize how much until you showed me what it could be like to be truly seen, truly known." "I was lonely too," Samuel admitted. "I thought I preferred solitude, but really I was just tired of people looking at me with fear or disgust. You never did that. You could not, obviously, but even if you could see, I do not think you would have. You have always looked deeper." "We saved each other," Clara said softly. "Yes, we did." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons in the mountains and the growth of their children. Jacob, at 12, could track and hunt as well as his father, and he often accompanied Samuel on longer trips into the wilderness. Sarah, at 10, had inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's love of the outdoors, spending hours exploring the forest near their cabin. Clara had long since mastered the rhythms of mountain life. She tended an impressive garden in the summer, preserved enough food to see them through harsh winters, and had learned to make medicines from mountain plants that Samuel gathered for her. She could navigate their property without assistance, knew every tree and rock and creek bend. But more than that, she had built a life rich in love and purpose. Samuel was as devoted to her at 15 years of marriage as he had been during their courtship. He still described the world to her in careful detail, still held her hand when they walked together, still made her feel like the most precious thing in his world. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, or rather, as Samuel described the sunset while Clara listened, he said, "Do you ever regret leaving town, having a life that is harder than it might have been?" "Never," Clara said without hesitation. "This life is not easier, but it is richer. I have you, I have our children, I have purpose and love and a place where I belong. What more could anyone want?" "I do not deserve you," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You do. We deserve each other, Samuel. We both know what it is to be judged by what we are not, rather than what we are. And we chose to see past all that to what really matters. I love you, Clara Morrison. And I love you, Samuel Morrison." As the children grew older and more independent, Clara and Samuel found themselves entering a new phase of life. Jacob, now 16, had built his own small cabin on their property and was beginning to trap and hunt on his own. Sarah, 14, was showing an interest in the healing arts and spent hours with Clara learning about medicinal plants. Samuel, now in his late 40s, had acquired a few more scars and gray streaks in his long hair, but he was still strong and capable. Clara, at 40, felt more settled and content than ever. Her hair had threads of silver now, and her hands bore the calluses of years of work, but she moved through their mountain home with confidence and grace. They talked sometimes about eventually moving closer to civilization as they aged, but neither felt a pressing need for that yet. The mountains were home, and they were suited to this life. It was in the spring of their 17th year of marriage that they received word that Herbert had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Clara grieved deeply for the uncle who had taken her in and loved her, even if he had not always understood her. Samuel held her as she cried, and then made the arrangements for them to travel to Los Alamos for the funeral. The town had changed dramatically since their last visit. The railroad had indeed come through, and Los Alamos was no longer the small frontier settlement Clara remembered. It was bustling and growing, full of new people and new businesses. At the funeral, Clara was surrounded by people expressing their condolences. Many of them remembered her from before she married Samuel, and she could hear the surprise in their voices as they saw her with her capable, handsome children and her devoted husband. After the service, Margaret pulled Clara aside. "Your uncle was so proud of you, Clara. He talked about you often, about how you had built such a good life in the mountains. He said he had worried for nothing, that you had found exactly what you needed. He gave me a home when I had none," Clara said. "I will always be grateful for that. And you gave him peace of mind in his final years, knowing that you were happy and loved. That is no small gift." Before they left town, Samuel took Clara to the old trading post, which was now owned by someone else, but still stood in the same location. "This is where it all started," Samuel said. "Where I first heard your voice and realized that maybe I did not have to spend my whole life alone. Where you asked me to walk with you," Clara remembered, and I said yes, never imagining where that walk would lead. "Where has it led?" Samuel asked, though Clara knew he knew the answer. to everything I never dared to hope for, to love, to family, to a life that is wholly and completely mine. To you, Samuel. It has always led to you." He pulled her into his arms, and Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Around them, the town bustled with activity, people rushing past on their important business. But Clara and Samuel stood still in their small bubble of peace, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The years continued to flow like the creek near their cabin, constant and sure. Jacob married a young woman from a neighboring mountain community when he was 20, and they built their home nearby. Sarah, at 18, went to Santa Fe to study medicine, writing long letters home about her studies and adventures. She promised to return to the mountains when her training was complete, wanting to serve the scattered communities of the high country. Clara and Samuel, now in their 50s, found joy in being grandparents. Jacob and his wife Emma had 3 children in quick succession, and they often brought them to visit. Clara delighted in teaching her grandchildren the same lessons she had taught her own children, that there were many ways to experience the world, and that limitations could be opportunities for creativity rather than obstacles. Samuel had finally allowed some gray to show in his beard and had cut his hair shorter, though it still fell past his collar. The scars that had once made people turn away had faded with time, and their grandchildren climbed all over him without fear, fascinated by the stories behind each mark. "Tell us about the bear, Grandpa," they would beg, and Samuel would recount the tale of how he had come to Los Alamos and met their grandmother. "And Grandma could not see the bear?" one of the children asked. "No, but she could hear it just fine," Samuel said. "And she was braver than any of the men in that town, let me tell you." Clara laughed. "I was not brave, I was just practical." "You have always been both," Samuel corrected. As they entered their 60s, Samuel and Clara finally made the decision to build a smaller cabin closer to Jacob's family. The winter snows were getting harder for Samuel to navigate, and Clara worried about them being completely isolated if something went wrong. The new cabin was smaller, but no less comfortable, and being near family meant there was always help available if needed. But Samuel and Clara remained fiercely independent, still managing their own household and only accepting help when absolutely necessary. Sarah returned from Santa Fe at 25, now a trained nurse and midwife. She settled in a small town at the base of the mountains and became invaluable to the community, bringing modern medical knowledge to a place that had mostly relied on folk remedies and hope. "I learned from the best," Sarah told Clara when she came to visit. "You taught me that paying attention to details, sounds, textures, smells could tell you as much as sight. That has made me a better healer." Clara felt a fierce pride in both her children. They had taken the lessons of their unusual childhood and turned them into strengths, becoming compassionate and capable adults who made their corner of the world better. When Samuel turned 68, he began having trouble with his joints, the result of decades of hard physical labor in harsh conditions. Clara, now 62 and still spry, took over more of the physical tasks around their cabin. She chopped wood by sound and feel, tended their garden with practiced hands, and made sure Samuel rested when he needed to. "This is not how it is supposed to work," Samuel grumbled one day when his knees refused to cooperate. "I'm supposed to be taking care of you." "We take care of each other," Clara said firmly. "That has always been our way. And you took care of me for many years, Samuel Morrison. It is my turn now." Despite his physical struggles, Samuel's mind remained sharp, and he spent his days teaching his grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the mountains he loved. He carved beautiful wooden animals for the little ones and told endless stories of his adventures. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Jacob had become the patriarch of their growing mountain clan, and Sarah's medical practice had made her a respected figure in several communities. Between them, Clara and Samuel had 7 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. 40 years, Samuel marveled as he and Clara sat together on the porch, listening to the chaos of family around them. "Feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "I would not change a single day," Clara said, her hand finding his as automatically as breathing. "Even the hard ones?" "Especially the hard ones. They taught us what we were made of." Samuel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I came to Los Alamos expecting to kill a bear and leave. Instead, I found a life worth living. You gave me that, Clara. You gave it to me too. Before you, I was just existing, waiting for life to happen to someone else. You showed me that I could have everything I wanted, that being blind did not mean being helpless or hopeless. You were never helpless. You just needed someone to see you clearly. And you needed someone who would not flinch from your scars. We found what we needed in each other. As the sun set over the mountains described to Clara by their youngest grandson in enthusiastic if not entirely accurate terms, Clara reflected on the strange path her life had taken. She had gone from being the pitied blind girl that no one wanted to being the matriarch of a thriving mountain family. She had found love with a man everyone else feared, and together they had built something lasting. The next few years were peaceful ones. Samuel's health continued to decline slowly, but he remained sharp and engaged with life. Clara cared for him with the same patient attention he had always shown her, and their love deepened into something beyond words. When Samuel was 72, he took a fall while checking traps and broke his hip. Jacob carried him back to the cabin, and Sarah came to care for him. For weeks, Samuel lay in bed, frustrated by his body's betrayal, but grateful for his family's care. I am sorry," he told Clara one night as she sat beside his bed. "I know this is not the life you signed up for, nursing an old man." "Samuel Morrison, do not be ridiculous. I signed up for a life with you in sickness and in health. This is exactly what I chose. You deserve better than this. I have exactly what I want. You, here, with me. Everything else is details." Samuel recovered enough to walk with a cane, but he never regained his former strength. He made peace with the limitations of age, spending his days carving and telling stories and loving his family. It was a cold February morning, nearly 45 years after their wedding, when Samuel did not wake up. Clara was beside him in their bed when she realized his breathing had stopped. She lay there for a long moment, her hand on his chest, feeling the absence of his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered to him, "for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me a life I never dreamed possible." The funeral was held in the small church in the town where Sarah practiced, and it seemed like every person in the mountain communities came to pay their respects. Samuel Morrison had been a legend in these parts, the mountain man with the scarred face who had killed bears and lions and lived according to his own code. But to Clara and their family, he had been so much more than that. Clara stood beside the grave as they lowered Samuel into the ground, her children on either side of her. She did not cry, she had done her crying in private, but she felt the weight of loss settling into her bones. "He loved you so much, Mama," Sarah said softly. "I know, and I loved him. That love made everything possible." After Samuel's death, Clara moved in with Jacob and Emma. She was 70 by now and willing to admit that living alone was no longer practical. But she remained active and engaged, helping with the great-grandchildren and teaching anyone who wanted to learn about the mountain plants she had spent decades studying. She lived for another 6 years, long enough to see 2 more great-great-grandchildren born. Her mind remained sharp until the end, and she spent her final days surrounded by family, telling them stories of their grandfather and the life they had built together. On a warm August evening, Clara died peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Samuel on a hillside overlooking the valley they had called home. The grandchildren carved a simple stone that read, "Clara Morrison, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." She saw with her heart what others missed with their eyes. In the years that followed, the story of Clara and Samuel became part of mountain legend. People told their children about the blind woman and the scarred mountain man who had found each other when no one else wanted them, who had built a life together in the high country against all odds. Jacob's grandchildren would take their own children to the graves on the hillside and tell them the story. Great-great-grandmother Clara could not see, they would explain, and great-great-grandfather Samuel had scars that frightened people. But they saw past all that to what really mattered. They loved each other truly, and they built something that lasted. The cabin where Clara and Samuel had spent most of their marriage was maintained by the family as a memorial. Inside, carefully preserved, were the rope railings Samuel had strung to help Clara navigate, the raised garden beds he had built for her, the carved wooden animals he had made for their children and grandchildren. And in the valley below, the creek continued to flow year after year, constant and sure, just like the love story it had witnessed, a love that had transformed two outcasts into the foundation of a family. Two people told they were not enough into partners who were everything to each other. A blind woman and a scarred mountain man into a legend that would be told for generations. Their love had proven that being seen had nothing to do with eyes and everything to do with heart. That scars, whether visible or invisible, did not define a person's worth. That two people who did not fit the world's expectations could create their own world and fill it with love, family, and purpose. Clara had been blind, and they had said no man would want her. But Samuel had said then she would not see his scars. And in that simple exchange, in that willingness to look past surface differences to the hearts beneath, they had found everything that mattered. They had found each other, and that had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.